Good morning. I'm Karen Christensen, and there's something I want to discuss with you, which is why third places don't get the attention one would expect in loads of books about social connection. So I'm going to go back to some things that Ray Oldenburg wrote, and then to things I've been thinking about as I go through other material to see if some of the experts who write about loneliness, conversations, social capital have something that I should be mentioning in the sequel to The Great Good Place. And I've been pondering this. I've been outside fixing the gutters and dealing with the birds. The birds have figured out that I am a soft touch. So even though I left them food this morning, they saw me outside working in the garden and sort of came and lined themselves up on the wire. So I went and fed them again. Anyway, that gave me time to think about how important this is and how curious it is that these things have not got attention and not got the attention that they really need. It's third places is really the missing chapter in books about loneliness, community, social connectivity in general, and anything to do with social life. It's missing, even though third places and what's sometimes called third spaces is a subject that's in the public view all the time now, especially since the pandemic. How have the scholars and authors missed this? Well, Ray Oldenburg, when he first wrote about third places, he said, one might suppose that the intellectuals of the planning and architectural professions, the book writers, would have a broader and better vision. I have found little to be encouraged about there. I've scanned scores of books and manuals on the subject, never to find the barest mention of lounges, taverns, bars, or saloons, of donut shops, coffee shops, pool halls, bingo halls, clubs, lodges, youth recreation centers. These places apparently don't belong anywhere in the thinking of the planners. That's not quite true today, but it's pretty close. And actually, I am going to apply this specifically to academic researchers. And it's actually not so hard to figure out. I remember when I was editing, we were working on the Encyclopedia of Community, and my co-editor was an anthropologist. And I felt myself kind of more inclined in a general way to sociology. It seems social. And yet I would read the articles by the sociologists who contributed to it. Finally went to my co-editor and I said, David, I don't understand this. There are no people in the articles by the sociologists. And he laughed. And what I found out is that sociologists are quite theoretical. And when they do, they tend to rely on data, stuff that can be quantified and put into numbers, put into spreadsheets. Now, this, of course, in the days of AI is all the more important. And I saw it just recently. I was at Harvard at the Fairbanks Center, with the Fairbanks Center for Chinese Studies, and someone was giving a lecture about Chinese influence and whether China really wants, what kind of influence China wants to have in the world. And it was a professor from Georgetown, who had done, obviously a great deal of research, but the way she did her research on this was very curious to me. She simply took digital text from the People's Daily, which is the Communist Party's newspaper, and put in keywords and did searches, basically data crunched references to a certain number of topics that had to do with Chinese influence. So everything was turned into data. The data set came from a very limited source as well. It was simply, the presentation was simply data-based. So what you're finding is that because researchers can use AI, use technology to turn even something as sort of soft as that, influence is soft power, into Excel sheets, that you're getting research that is very limited, to my mind, in a way that Ray Oldenburg was talking about. And it's actually worse to me. This is a data determinism. It's even worse than the kind of paper dependence that William McNeill would rail against in historians who traditionally historians say that unless there's a document, it didn't happen, or at least they can't say that it happened. And Bill strongly believed or recognized that there's lots of stuff that doesn't go onto paper, and there's lots of paper that doesn't survive, and that you have to use your good sense. You have to be logical, and you have to also use some imagination if you're going to create, if you're going to come up with, you're going to understand history in a less deterministic way, in a less limited way, in a way that is both more useful, more interesting, and actually more persuasive. So, third places. Let's just go back a little bit and look at the history of acknowledgement and interest in third places amongst academics. I'm first going to refer to someone who's not, I think although he certainly is taught at Stanford, I think he would not call himself an academic per se, Howard Rheingold, who wrote the sort of seminal book on online community called The Virtual Community back in 1995. And he started it with the story of a first online community called The Well. This is almost a decade before Facebook started, just to give you a sense. So this is ancient history. But in that book, he wrote, so 1995, he wrote that the well was a replacement for the places where people informally used to meet: the drugstore lunch counter, the bench in the town square, the friendly neighborhood tavern or coffee shop, because he made clear in his mind those places had disappeared. Now, it's pretty interesting because 6 years earlier, Ray Oldenburg had published The Great Good Place. It had a great deal of influence, was widely read and known, but Howard Rheingold obviously hadn't read it and didn't know it, and didn't know that there was a term for the places he so accurately describes. He obviously had a very clear picture of what such places were, but was also convinced all that time ago, that's 30 years ago, that they were gone. Now, 5 years later, the year 2000, Robert Putnam, political scientist at Harvard University, publishes a book that is still widely cited as the book that is most relevant to social capital is how he defined it, but to a kind of community building, and also talked about as the title of that book is Bowling Alone, and it's about the breakdown of relationships and social interaction, and the idea is that bowling leagues and all the kind of clubs that people were members of, that the loss of those places, loss of those experiences, loss of those clubs and teams are the cause of our, social breakdown, political polarization, loneliness. In that book, 11 years after Ray Oldenburg's book was published, he makes one mention of Ray Oldenburg, does not use the term third place, and simply says that such places have disappeared. Again, a big claim, and certainly not accurate in terms of the whole wide world, perhaps in terms of his life and his experience. And it's especially interesting because not long after Ray published the book, Howard Schultz of Starbucks had started using the term third place a great deal in Starbucks materials. It's reports, it's promotion, and his own talk about what his goals were. He actually is rather infamous for having claimed to have invented the term third place, which he did not. And I went right along. What else has been written? What are the major books that relate to third places, relate to the kind of things that we say third places can help to cure, solve, improve. Another Harvard professor, Sherry Turkle, wrote a book called Reclaiming Conversation, which has she's written a great deal about online life and social media and digital devices. The thing about that book, very interesting book, but there's nothing about the place where conversations happen, the places that are conducive to conversation happening. Nothing at all. Then another recent book, it was a book called Together by Vivek Murthy, the Surgeon General of the United States. Again, this book was about loneliness, the loneliness crisis, or epidemic, I believe he called it. And that's been much quoted. Once again, nothing about the kind of places where we can be together, where people traditionally around the world throughout history have come together for pleasant, informal, convivial times, just social time that made them happier, made them feel good, and certainly meant that they didn't feel lonely. So from loneliness, we go to anxiety. Jonathan Haidt, a professor at New York University, best-selling book, focused on young people and phones. And he certainly encourages parents in that book to get their children together, to encourage them to play. But there's nothing to speak of about children's need to have places of their own, third places of their own, which I find very strange because even in my childhood, let alone endless stories you can read about children in the past, children establish their places in the woods, a cave, they build forts, they build ice lodges, they have tree houses, they have places that really act exactly as third places. A tree house or there's a rock in the woods down from my house where kids used to go. They'd, see who's there. And in another book and a concept called The 15-Minute City, Carlos Moreno in Paris very much focused the kind of environment, the kind of layout of a community that will encourage third place use. But I was surprised that there was not essentially a chapter on those gathering places that Paris in particular is famous for. Its cafes and bistros. Those are just great examples, much used by Rheingold and others of third places. In France, in fact, the term tiers-lieu is third place is quite widely known, but it's being applied to places that we would call a community center, something that's actually run by a government or a nonprofit, by a city or a town, rather than the third places that France is so famous for, and that have provided the social connectivity that people so long for, and that existed there more easily because the places, even without having the redesign of the 15-minute city, were more walkable. So there were neighborhood places that people could go at, in the morning for coffee, later on for a glass of wine. And Ray talked about why this is so important in his book. And I'm going to close by reading something that ties into an issue that we're concerned about a great deal right now in 2025. He said the bulk of social scientific writing in the area of informal public gathering places, that is, third places, consists of ethnographic descriptions that await integration into more abstract and analytical efforts, addressing the place and function of these centers of informal public life in the society. Sociologists may ask themselves why so little has been done in this area since Georges Simel's brief essay on sociability over half a century ago. Finally, I would suggest to colleagues that the possibilities for cross-cultural research into the quality of informal public life seems exciting. The most useful and pertinent data are always within the public domain, and the invitation to foreign travel should require little encouragement. Whether the present effort, meaning his book, The Great Good Place, serves to guide such efforts or merely encourage them makes no difference. The important thing is that this research be conducted, if only to help our nation reinstitute the kind of human association essential to all democracies. Amen to that. He wrote that in 1989. I'm afraid that his colleagues did not jump to the task, and I've been left to kind of pull together a lot of material. There is material out there, but it's surprising to find that it is a missing chapter in the books where it would be where it would most obviously fit, where it would be the perfect fit. So we'll hope to see more. This is one of the challenges I have in writing the sequel to The Great Good Place. Thanks. I welcome comments on this, and we will find ways to do better. Thanks for joining me at The Way We Live Now, where we roam the world for ideas and inspiration. Please leave a comment and subscribe to the newsletter at KarenChristensen.substack.com.